My friends, in today's world, everyone wants to speak, but very few want to listen. Ours in God. Everyone wants to prove their point, but very few want to understand another's. Silence is not weakness. It is inner strength. Silence is not emptiness. It is fullness. When you stay silent at the right time, life has a beautiful way of rewarding you in ways that noise never can. Think of a seed. 16 hours in God. When you bury it in the soil, it doesn't scream, it doesn't shout. It quietly goes underground. God. In silence, it breaks open, grows roots, and eventually rises a strong tree. The silence of the seed is its preparation for greatness. In the same way, God, when we embrace silence in our life, we allow space for growth, clarity, and blessings. Many times in life, we find ourselves in situations where the first impulse is to react. Somebody says something offensive, and instantly we want to reply. Someone criticizes us, and we feel that burning need to defend ourselves. A misunderstanding happens, and our tongue starts racing faster than our mind. And later, when the storm settles, we think to ourselves, why did I even say that? I could have handled it better. Haven't we all been there? That is where silence becomes such a powerful gift. The US for 16 hours in God. When we choose silence instead of immediate reaction, it's like giving our mind a pause button, just like a computer that sometimes freezes when too many tabs are open. Our mind also gets overloaded when emotions, thoughts, and words rush together. Pressing pause allows everything to settle. It is in that silence we gain clarity. We see things as they are, not as our anger, our ego wants them to be. Think of a glass of muddy water. If you keep shaking it, the mud will keep swirling and the water will remain cloudy. But the moment you let the glass rest in stillness, the mud begins to settle and the water becomes clear. Silence does the same with our mind. God, as long as we keep shaking it with arguments, reactions, and constant talking, it remains cloudy. But in silence, the mind clears and clarity emerges. There was once a man who had a habit of reacting quickly, and God, whenever someone said something against him, he would instantly fight back with harsh words. Over time, he lost friends, damaged his family bonds, and even hurt his own peace of mind. Then one day, an elder told him, if you can wait just 10 breaths before responding, and God, your life will change. At first, he laughed at the advice, but gradually he tried it. Whenever anger rose, he silently counted 10 deep breaths. In those 10 breaths, clarity came. Sometimes he realized it wasn't even worth replying. Sometimes he understood the other person's pain, 16 hours in God, and sometimes he realized he had misunderstood the whole situation. 6 hours in God, silence in those moments didn't make him weak, it made him wise. Clarity also allows us to see opportunities hidden in challenges. In the noise of panic, we see only problems, but in silence, solutions appear. It's like when you are searching for a lost key. If you panic and rush around noisily, you hardly find it. But the moment you stop, calm down, and look quietly, The 16 hours in God. The key is often right in front of you. Life's answers work the same way. They appear in moments of calm, not chaos. Some people think silence means doing nothing. No, silence is not empty. It is full of answers. It is a state where our mind listens, where our heart speaks, and where our soul guides. In silence, Steen, and God, we start hearing the gentle whispers of wisdom that are otherwise drowned out by the loud noise of the world. And once clarity comes, our actions become sharper, our words become kinder, and our choices become wiser. So whenever confusion surrounds you, don't rush into words or decisions. Step into silence. Let your thoughts settle like that muddy glass of water. Because only in stillness does clarity appear, and only in clarity does wisdom grow. God. Many people in today's world think that silence is a sign of weakness. God. They believe that if they don't speak up immediately, if they don't defend themselves in every situation, 16 hours in God, if they don't prove their point in every argument, they will be considered timid or powerless. But the truth is completely opposite. Silence is not weakness. It is one of the greatest strengths a human being can develop. It takes far more courage to hold back your words than to throw them out carelessly. Imagine a person who loses their temper easily. The moment someone criticizes them, they explode. The moment a situation doesn't go their way, they start shouting. Does that look like strength? No, it shows that they are controlled by their emotions. Now think of another person and God. They hear the same criticism, they face the same difficulties, but they don't react immediately. They remain calm. They choose silence instead of anger. That calmness is not weakness. It is mastery over self. It takes a strong person to remain quiet when they have every reason to lash out. At 16 hours in God, there's a famous saying, a fool is known by his speech, but a wise man is known by his silence. It is so easy to speak without thinking, but it is extremely difficult to stay silent when your ego is burning to prove itself. That restraint requires discipline, maturity, and courage. A weak person cannot control their tongue, only a strong one can. Consider an example from nature. The ocean is vast, powerful, and filled with unshakable depth. Yet most of the time, it is calm and silent on the surface. In comparison, small streams and brooks make the loudest noise as they rush along. The ocean's silence is not a sign of weakness. It is a reflection of its immense strength. 16 hours in God. In the same way, people who are truly strong do not need to shout to prove themselves. 16 hours in God. Their silence speaks louder than their noise ever could. History also gives us countless examples. God, some of the greatest leaders were not the loudest talkers, but the calmest listeners. They knew that raising their voice did not raise their value. 16 hours in God. They commanded respect not through constant noise, but through the quiet power of presence. When they did speak, their words carried weight because silence had given them strength and wisdom behind every sentence. Think also about arguments in daily life. When two people argue loudly, both lose their peace. But the one who remains silent, who refuses to waste energy in proving unnecessary points, emerges stronger. They may look quiet on the outside for 16 hours in God, but inside they hold the power to control both the situation and themselves. Silence gives them victory without battle. It is important to understand that silence is not about being passive or avoiding confrontation. True silence is active self-control. It is choosing not to fight small battles so you can win the bigger wars. It is not weakness that keeps you quiet, but wisdom that tells you this is not worth your energy. It's about saving your strength for what truly matters in life. So, whenever people provoke you, whenever life tests you, and whenever your ego demands you to speak, remember this: the one who speaks out of impulse may feel powerful for a moment, but the one who holds silence in strength owns the moment itself. That is not weakness. It is real power. Relationships are delicate. They are built on trust, understanding, and communication. But many times, they are also destroyed not by big betrayals, but by small words spoken in anger. How often do we find ourselves saying something in the heat of the moment, only to regret it later? A single harsh sentence, a careless reply, or an unnecessary argument can leave scars in the heart of someone we love. Words once spoken cannot be taken back. They may be forgiven, but they are not always forgotten. And that is why silence becomes a shield that protects relationships from unnecessary damage. Think about it. When two people are angry at each other, both want to prove their point, us and God. Both want to win the argument. But in trying to win the argument, they end up losing the bond. What if, in that moment, one of them chose silence? Not the silence of resentment, but the silence of wisdom. The silence that says, right now, if I speak, it will only make things worse. Let me wait until emotions cool down. That silence would prevent words from turning into weapons. It would give space for calmness to return, for understanding to rise, and for love to remain stronger than ego. God, there's a beautiful story of a couple who had been married for many years. And God, they admitted that like any husband and wife, they too argued. But they had one rule: when tempers rose, one of them had to stay silent. Over time, they realized something powerful. Most arguments died on their own when only one side gave energy to them. Their silence did not mean they were weak. It meant valued the relationship more than the argument. And that simple habit kept their bond strong through decades. Silence also allows us to listen. And God, many conflicts don't come from bad intentions, but from lack of listening. When we remain silent, God, we give the other person space to express themselves fully. Instead of interrupting or countering, we begin to hear their pain, their perspective, their emotions. And once we truly listen, half the problem already finds a solution. And God, because what most people want is not for us to prove them wrong. They want to feel understood. Silence creates that understanding. And ours and God, another powerful way silence protects relationships is by reducing regret. We have all experienced moments where anger made us say things like, I don't care about you, or you never do anything right. These words hurt deeply. Later, when the anger cools, we realize we didn't mean them, but the damage is already done. A moment of silence during anger could have saved hours, days, or even years of healing. Silence saves us from regret, and it saves others from unnecessary pain. Silence also teaches us patience. Not every fight needs a reaction. Not every misunderstanding needs immediate explanation. Sometimes, the best way to protect a relationship is to allow time to its work. Just as wounds heal when left undisturbed, conflicts too often soften when given silence and space. Of course, silence should not be mistaken for avoidance. Avoidance pushes people away, but meaningful silence brings people closer. When silence is used with love, it becomes a shield. When it is used with indifference, it becomes a wall. The key is the intention behind our silence. If the intention is to preserve peace, protect love, and prevent hurt, then silence becomes one of the greatest protectors of relationships. So, whenever anger tempts you to lash out, remember, your silence in that moment is not a loss. It is a gift you are giving to your relationship, a shield that guards love from the fire of unnecessary words. We usually think of language as words, but the deepest wisdom in life is often expressed not through speech, but through silence. There is a kind of silence that communicates far more than words ever could. It is the silence of understanding, the silence of reflection, the silence of presence. This silence has no grammar, no vocabulary, no accent, and yet it is the most universal language that exists. Everyone, regardless of culture or background, understands it. Let me share a small example. Imagine sitting with a true friend. You don't need to talk constantly. Even in silence, you feel connected. Just being in each other's presence says, I understand you, I value you. That silence is louder than hours of conversation. It carries wisdom that words cannot. In the same way, silence in our life allows us to connect not just with others, but also with ourselves and with the deeper truths of life. Many of us think wisdom means having all the answers. But real wisdom often lies in knowing when to stay quiet. A wise person doesn't jump into every discussion, doesn't try to prove themselves in every debate, doesn't try to dominate every conversation. Instead, they observe, they listen, they reflect, and when they do speak, their words carry weight because they arise from silence. The unwise may speak 1,000 words and still say nothing. The wise may say just one sentence, but it touches hearts because behind that sentence lies the depth of silence. There is also a beautiful connection between silence and observation. When we are silent, we notice things that noise usually hides. A teacher once said to his student, When you learn to sit in silence, you will hear the trees speak, you will see the lessons in the rivers, you will understand the wisdom in the stars. At first, the student thought it was poetry, but later realized it was truth. Nature itself speaks a language of silence, and those who are quiet enough to observe receive its wisdom. In human relationships too, silence often communicates wisdom more powerfully than words. Think of moments when someone is grieving. We often struggle, wondering what to say to comfort them. But many times no words are needed. Just sitting quietly beside them, holding their hand, being present, that silent companionship is wisdom because it communicates love and care beyond language. Silence also teaches us humility. A wise person knows that they don't need to respond to everything. They understand that speaking less doesn't make them less important. It makes their words more meaningful. Silence keeps the ego in check. It allows space for thought before action. And this balance between silence and speech is what separates wisdom from impulsiveness. Another aspect is that silence gives us the chance to truly listen, not just to others, but to life itself. Our mind is constantly filled with noise, opinions, judgments, memories, worries. When we choose silence, we allow wisdom to enter. In silence, we can hear the gentle voice of conscience, the inner guidance that tells us what is right and what is wrong. That is why meditation, prayer, and reflection are so powerful. They take us into the language of silence, where wisdom naturally flows. So yes, silence is not emptiness. It is full of meaning. It is not absence of language. It is a higher language, a language that doesn't just reach the ears, but touches the heart. Those who understand this language of silence are never short of wisdom because they know that sometimes the most powerful message is not what is spoken, but what is quietly felt. Listening is one of the most underrated skills in life. Everyone wants to be heard, but very few are willing to truly listen. And here's the truth. Listening doesn't begin with ears, it begins with silence. Unless the mind is quiet, we may hear words, but we won't understand their meaning. That is why silence is the foundation of deep listening. Often when someone speaks to us, we are not really listening. We are only preparing our reply. They are talking, but in our mind we are busy thinking, what should I say next? How do I prove my point? How do I share my story? In this way, we hear the sound but miss the essence. But when we choose silence, when we pause our own thoughts and simply focus, we begin to understand not just the words, but also the emotions behind them. Imagine a child telling their parent about a tough day at school. If the parent interrupts with advice every few seconds, the child may feel unheard. But if the parent stays silent, nods gently, and listens with attention, the child feels valued. In that silence, trust is built. The child learns, I can open my heart here because I am being truly heard. That is the power of silence in listening. It doesn't just collect words, it collects hearts. There's a saying, most people don't listen with the intent to understand, they listen with the intent to reply. This is exactly where silence changes everything. By silencing our urge to reply immediately, we step into the shoes of the other person. We begin to see the world through their eyes, and this deep listening often solves conflicts that endless arguments cannot. Let's take an example from everyday life. In friendships, misunderstandings are common. One friend feels ignored, another feels unappreciated. The situation escalates because both try to defend themselves instead of listening. But when even one person decides to stay silent and listen fully, the energy changes. The friend feels heard, the frustration softens, and understanding begins to flow. Silence becomes the bridge that reconnects hearts. Silence in listening also sharpens perception. Words are only one part of communication. Tone expressions, pauses, and even what is left unsaid carry meaning. But these subtleties can only be noticed when we are silent enough to pay attention. Think of a musician listening to a song. An ordinary listener hears just the melody, but the trained ear in silence catches the smallest notes, the softest beats, the hidden harmonies. In the same way, when we practice silent listening, we begin to notice the hidden layers in conversations. Another important aspect is that deep listening heals. Many times, people don't need solutions. They need someone who listens without judgment. A grieving friend doesn't want philosophy, they want presence. A struggling colleague doesn't need quick fixes, they need empathy. By offering silence, by giving undivided attention, we become a source of healing. And in giving that healing, we strengthen bonds and build trust that lasts a lifetime. Silence also transforms us inwardly as listeners. The more we practice silent listening to others, the more we learn to listen to ourselves. We begin to hear the quiet signals of our own mind and body, the fatigue that says, rest, the inner voice that says, don't compromise this external silence, this is the right path, the intuition that's your values, the inner voice that says, we cultivate internal awareness. So silence is not just an absence of words. It is an invitation to listen deeply. It is the difference between hearing and understanding, between shallow connections and meaningful ones. And when we listen in silence, we give the greatest gift to others and to ourselves, the gift of being truly understood. If we look back at our lives, many of our biggest regrets don't come from things we did not say, but from things we said in anger, frustration, or haste. Words are powerful. They can heal, but they can also wound. Once released, they can never be taken back. Apologies may be offered. Forgiveness may be granted, but scars often remain. This is why silence, in moments of emotional turbulence, is such a great protector. It saves us from the heavy burden of regret. Think about it. How many times have we raised our voice, said something harsh to a loved one, and later wished we had stayed quiet? In the moment of anger, silence feels impossible. Our ego screams, "Speak now, defend yourself, prove your point." But once that storm passes, we often wish we had held back. That is the beauty of silence. It is like a shield we can use in the present to protect our future self from pain. Imagine a workplace scenario. A manager criticizes an employee unfairly in front of others. The employee feels humiliated and is ready to snap back with harsh words. But instead, the employee takes a breath, remains silent, and walks away. Later, when emotions cool down, they are able to calmly discuss the issue in private and resolve it with dignity. Now think, if the employee had spoken out in anger at that very moment, they might have said something disrespectful, damaging their career and reputation. Silence in that moment prevented a lifetime of regret. There's an old proverb, words are like arrows. Once released, they cannot be taken back. Just as we cannot stop an arrow mid, we cannot pull back words once spoken. That is why silence becomes such a wise choice. By staying quiet when emotions are high, we keep those arrows in the quiver instead of launching them recklessly. Later, when we do speak, our words are thoughtful, measured, and far less likely to cause harm. We also regret when we reveal too much too soon. Sometimes we overshare secrets, express opinions we later reconsider, or make promises in the heat of excitement that we cannot keep. Each of these situations teaches us the value of silence. The discipline to pause, to wait, to hold back until the right time. This is what saves us from future embarrassment and regret. Another area where silence saves us is in relationships. Harsh words spoken to parents, spouses, children, or friends can cut deeper than we imagine. We might apologize, and they might forgive, but the memory of those words often lingers in their hearts. Silence, in moments of irritation or anger, keeps that damage from happening. It says, "I value this person more than I value winning this argument." And that choice preserves love while saving us from lifelong guilt. Silence also gives us time to reflect. By holding back our words, we give our mind space to ask, will I regret this later? Will these words hurt more than they help? Am I speaking from love or from ego? In that space of reflection, clarity emerges, and many times we realize that silence was the wiser path. In the long run, silence doesn't just reduce regrets, it builds a reputation of maturity and self-control. People begin to trust us more because they know we don't speak recklessly. They know our words are thoughtful and our silence is meaningful. And trust, once earned, is one of the greatest rewards in life. So, silence is not empty. It is full of wisdom, protection, and foresight. By choosing silence in heated moments, we are not losing the battle. We are saving ourselves from a war with regret that might have lasted a lifetime. Self-control is one of the greatest strengths a person can have in God, but it is also one of the hardest to practice. Our impulses are strong, our emotions are quick, and our tongues are often faster than our minds. Many of us have experienced this. Before we even realize it, we've already said something we shouldn't have. And then comes the regret. Silence, when practiced with awareness, becomes a powerful tool to train and strengthen self-control. Think of silence as the gym where self-control is built. Just as lifting weights strengthens muscles, holding backwards strengthens discipline. Every time we choose silence over reaction, we are exercising our ability to master ourselves. And the more we practice, the stronger we become. Over time, silence transforms from a struggle into a natural strength. There is a story about a wise man who was asked how he became so calm and composed. He smiled and said, "Every time I wanted to shout, I stayed silent. Every time I wanted to argue, I stayed silent. Every time I wanted to prove I was right, I stayed silent. And slowly, silence became my strength." His point was clear. Control over speech leads to control over emotions, and control over emotions leads to mastery over life. When we are silent, we give ourselves time to regulate our inner state. Anger, for example, is like fire. It burns hot and fast. If we throw words into it, they act like fuel, making the fire bigger. But if we stay silent, the fire slowly burns out on its own. That silence is not weakness, it is deliberate self-control. It says, "I will not let my emotions control me. I will control them." A silence also trains patience. When we don't rush to reply, we teach ourselves to wait. Waiting itself is an act of self-control. In our fast-paced world, where everything demands instant responses, silence reminds us that wisdom doesn't come from speed, but from depth. A patient response is far more effective than a quick reaction, and silence is what creates that gap between the two. Another way silence strengthens self-control is by breaking the habit of impulsiveness. Impulsiveness often leads us into trouble, whether it's speaking harshly, spending unnecessarily, or reacting without thought. By practicing silence in speech, we slowly train our mind to pause before acting in other areas of life as well. That's why silence is not just about words. It spills into behavior, habits, and decisions. Even in relationships, silence teaches restraint. In arguments, the strongest temptation is to say the most hurtful thing to win. But silence reminds us, winning the argument is not as important as protecting the bond. By controlling our urge to speak harshly, we not only practice self-control, but also strengthen love and respect. Silence also has a spiritual dimension in building self-control. When we are silent, we begin to observe our own thoughts. We notice how restless the mind is, how quickly it jumps from one thought to another. This awareness is the first step to mastery. Once we see the chaos inside, we begin to calm it. Over time, Silence teaches us to control not just our speech, but also our thoughts and desires. So, silence is like a mirror. It reflects our inner state and helps us regulate it. Every time we practice silence, we are saying to ourselves, I am in charge, not my anger, not my ego, not my impulses. And that is the essence of self-control. Mastering yourself before life tries to master you. Our world today is constantly buzzing with noise. Notifications, conversations, endless entertainment, and information flowing from all directions. While this noise keeps us busy, it also drowns out something precious, the quiet voice of creativity. True creativity does not emerge in chaos, it blossoms in silence. When the outer world becomes quiet, the inner world starts to sing, and in that song, creativity takes birth. Think about artists, writers, musicians, or inventors. Most of their groundbreaking ideas did not come in the middle of noise. They came in moments of solitude. A poet often finds inspiration in the stillness of the early morning. A painter often discovers ideas in the silence of observation. A scientist may stumble upon insights not when the lab is full of noise, but when their mind is still and reflective. Silence acts like fertile soil where seeds of ideas grow into something extraordinary. There's a reason why some of the greatest minds in history valued silence so much. Take the example of thinkers who would retreat into solitude to find solutions to problems the world couldn't solve. They weren't running away, they were stepping into silence to let their minds breathe. Just as a garden needs space and sunlight to grow, creativity needs silence and stillness to flourish. Even in daily life, silence sparks creativity. Imagine sitting quietly in a park. At first, the silence may feel empty, but slowly, you notice the rustling of leaves, the patterns of clouds, the flight of birds. Your mind begins to connect dots, to imagine stories, to see beauty in simple details. What seemed like ordinary surroundings suddenly become a canvas of inspiration. This happens because silence clears away distractions and allows our imagination to come alive. Silence also helps us hear our own inner voice. Most of the time, our mind is crowded with the voices of others, opinions, judgments, comparisons. In that crowd, our own creative voice gets lost. But when we step into silence, we reconnect with ourselves. We begin to ask, what do I truly want to create? What is my unique expression? And from that inner dialogue, original ideas are born. Another powerful way silence fuels creativity is by connecting us with intuition. Logic and reasoning have their place, but many great ideas come from intuition, a sudden insight, a spark that feels most magical. Intuition doesn't shout, it whispers. And to hear that whisper, we need silence. That's why many inventors and artists describe their creative process as listening to something within. Silence creates the perfect environment for listening. Even problem-solving benefits from silence. When we are overwhelmed by a challenge, our first instinct is to think harder and faster. But often, the solution arrives when we step away, when we stop forcing the mind and allow silence to do its work. Have you noticed how ideas sometimes appear in the shower, during a walk, or in the middle of quiet reflection? That's the power of silence. It lets creativity flow naturally. Silence is not empty, it is full of possibilities. In silence, the mind stops rushing and starts imagining. It becomes a playground where ideas dance freely without being judged too quickly. That is why silence is not just relaxation, it is creation. Every masterpiece, every invention, every innovation began in someone's silent moment of reflection. So if we want to unlock our creativity, we must embrace silence. It is not wasted time, it is invested time. For in silence, we don't just escape noise, we discover the endless well of ideas within us, waiting to be expressed. Respect is something every human being desires, but not everyone knows how to earn it. Some believe that by talking more, by dominating conversations, by always trying to prove they are right, they will gain respect. Yet, often the opposite happens. People may notice them, but they don't truly respect them. Real respect is not earned by volume, but by value, and silence plays a key role in creating that value. Think of the people we naturally admire. They are not the ones who constantly interrupt, boast, or argue. Instead, we respect the ones who speak less but speak wisely. When such people remain silent, their silence itself feels powerful. And when they do speak, their words carry weight because are born out of thought, reflection, and patience. Silence makes their voice stronger, not weaker. There's an old saying, a wise man is known by his silence, and a fool by his speech. This does not mean we should never talk. It means that restraint in speech builds dignity. The one who always has to say something may seem entertaining for a while, but they don't earn deep respect. On the other hand, the one who chooses silence until necessary shows self-control and maturity always commands respect. Silence also prevents us from lowering ourselves in unnecessary arguments. Many times, people try to provoke us with harsh words. If we respond at their level, we get dragged into the same negativity. But if we remain silent, we rise above it. Others watching the situation don't see us as weak. They see us as wise enough not to waste energy on pettiness. That silent restraint earns us quiet respect in ways that shouting never could. There's a beautiful story of a king who once faced heavy criticism from his people. His ministers urged him to respond and defend himself. But the king remained silent. Days later, the criticism faded on its own, and his dignity only grew stronger. His silence communicated strength. He did not need to fight every battle because his character spoke louder than any defense. People respected him more for his calmness than they would have for any clever argument. In relationships too, silence builds respect. Imagine two friends. One constantly talks over the other, interrupts, and always tries to prove they are smarter. The other listens patiently, speaks only when necessary, and chooses words carefully. Over time, who will be respected more? The one who listens and speaks with intention. Silence gives space for others to feel heard, and that simple act earns their respect and trust. Even in leadership, silence is a mark of greatness. The best leaders are often the best listeners. Their silence shows humility. It communicates, I value your thoughts. I don't need to speak all the time to prove my authority. And because they don't rush to speak, their final decisions carry wisdom. People respect leaders not for how loudly they speak, but for how wisely they choose their words, shaped by silence. Silence also keeps our reputation safe. The more we talk, the more chances we have to say something wrong, something careless, or something we regret. But silence protects us. When people realize that we don't speak unnecessarily, they begin to value our words more. They know if we speak, it must be important. This scarcity of words builds respect, just as rare gems are valued more than common stones. So yes, silence is not about being invisible. It is about being respected. It shows that we don't need constant attention to prove our worth. Our restraint, our patience, and our ability to stay silent when others cannot silently elevates us in the eyes of the world. Life today is overflowing with noise, constant notifications, endless conversations, loud opinions, and the pressure of business. In all this external noise, we forget that the deepest truths of life, the most sacred connections, are not found in words or noise, but in silence. Silence is the bridge between us and the divine. It is in silence that the soul whispers, the heart prays, and the divine responds. When we close our eyes and sit in silence, something beautiful begins to happen. The restless mind slowly starts to calm down. Thoughts that were rushing like a storm begin to settle, and in that stillness, we feel a presence greater than ourselves. It is not always about hearing a voice or seeing a sign. It is about sensing peace, guidance, and strength that flows from silence. This is why all great spiritual traditions across cultures and religions emphasize the power of silence. It is not emptiness, it is sacred space. Think of a temple, a mosque, a church, or a meditation hall. What is the common feature of all these places? Silence. When we step inside, the world's noise stays at the door. In that silence, prayer feels deeper, connection feels stronger, and the presence of the divine feels closer. The quietness of those sacred spaces reminds us that silence itself is a form of worship. There's a story of a man who prayed daily, but he always spoke, asking, requesting, pleading with the divine. One day, an elder told him, prayer is not only about speaking, it is also about listening. The man was confused and asked, listening? But I don't hear anything. The elder smiled and said, "You don't hear because your noise is louder than his silence." That day, the man sat quietly in prayer, not asking for anything, but just being still. For the first time, he felt a peace so deep, it was as though the divine itself was speaking, not in words, but in presence. Silence also allows us to connect with gratitude. In the quiet moments of reflection, we begin to notice the countless blessings we often ignore in the rush of life. The breath we take so effortlessly, the people who love us, the opportunities we have been given. Gratitude rises naturally in silence, and gratitude itself is a divine connection. Moreover, silence takes us beyond the ego. When we are constantly talking, our ego is in control. It wants to prove, to show, to be noticed. But in silence, the ego softens. We realize that we are not the center of the universe, but part of something far greater. That realization humbles us, and humility is the gateway to experiencing the divine. Silence is also the language of meditation. In meditation, we are not running after the past or worrying about the future. We are simply present. And in that present moment, the divine becomes visible, not outside, but inside. The peace we seek, the answers we long for, the love we crave, they are all waiting for us in silence. The divine doesn't always communicate through thunder or miracles. Most often, it communicates through whispers, through stillness, through silence. Just as a calm lake reflects the beauty of the sky more clearly than a stormy ocean, a silent heart reflects the divine more deeply than a noisy one. So yes, silence is not an absence, it is a presence. It is the presence of peace, of clarity, of guidance, and of the divine itself. When we embrace silence, we don't move away from life, we move closer to the source of life, and in that connection, we find strength, purpose, and unshakable serenity.